Hello, I think I'm okay to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the W Forum. We're going to be in conversation with the 2020 Moira Gemmill Prize shortlist. We were perhaps slightly too optimistic, perhaps a little naive to last March when we met at the Battersea Art Centre and hoped to be able to reunite the shortlist in London for this conversation. I'm very pleased that we're able to do it virtually. I think it's a very important part of the program to be able to kind of get to know each other's work and to have these architects present their work to an audience and be part of a conversation. So this is the 10th year of our work for gender equality, and the purpose of the W Awards and program, which is done in partnership with both the Architectural Review and the Architects Journal, is to educate, to inspire, and to promote positive change. And with the W Awards, we want to celebrate work of great architects and to help highlight new role models for young women in practice. We're aware of the time that it can take for mindsets to evolve and of the entrenched inequalities that rule the profession. But slowly, we're starting to recognize the multiple hands and voices that contribute to the richness of our built world. With that in mind, I'd like to first thank our practice partners, the W partners, who support the program and who work directly with us through benchmarking and mentorship events to help lead change. It's been a year which has seen increased awareness of the importance of collaboration within architectural practice. The RIBA Gold Medal and the Pritzker Prize were awarded to Grafton architects, and the Serpentine Gallery announced South African studio Counterspace, led by 3 women as designers of its pavilion. Postponed obviously to next year, but it will happen. And so the Moira Gemmill Prize for Emerging Architecture is named after a founding judge of these awards. She actively supported up-and-coming architects by giving them early commissions when she was director of the Victoria and Albert Museum here in London. And so recent winners of these awards include Xu Tiantian, Gloria Cabral, Rosana Montiel, and Gabriela Echegaray. And this year's shortlist was quite diverse, and the projects were as varied as the context that the different architects work in. But what was highlighted by the judges is that each of them propose a sensitive and refined solution to the needs of their particular brief. Part of the judging process, because this prize goes to a body of work and a kind of the idea of like the evolution of a practice, part of the judging process then is to unpick the threads, the motivations and the aspirations that lie behind the built work. And with the judges, we ask questions such as, how can architectural practice contribute to changing the world, to changing something beyond the project? The judges were genuinely impressed by the exceptional quality of work, and they said the shortlisted architects hold on to their dreams and have the courage to fight for them. Eva Jirikna, who was one of our judges, alongside Oliver Wainwright, Manisha Kelly, and Stefanie MacDonald, said that making a decision on a winner gave her the hardest time of her life. So we ended the judging session with both a winner and a highly commended, which is actually unprecedented in these awards. And so the shortlist for this year, we have Simona Della Rocca, who is one half of BDR Bureau here from Torino. We have Stefanie Rhodes from Getty Routh Rhodes here in London. We have Francesca Torzo from Francesca Torzo Architetto in Genoa, who was the winner of this year's prize. And we have Mariam Kamara, who's the founder of Atelier Masomi. Mariam Kamara unfortunately can't join us here today. So I just want to give a very, very short introduction to let you know a little bit about the work that she presented in these awards. And then we will hear from the other 3 shortlisted architects who will each present their work like they presented to the judges before we start a joint conversation where we will obviously welcome questions from the panel. So yes, just a few words on Mariam if I can't make up for her presence. So her practice is concerned with the use of locally derived resources and with the representation of women and young people in public life. Some of her recent projects include the Niamey 2000 housing development, conceived in 2016 with United for Design, and the Hikma religious and secular complex in Dandaji. This consisted of a new mosque, along with the restoration and conversion of the former mosque into a community space and library that she designed in collaboration with Studio Chahar and opened in 2018. Having studied in the States, Kamara chose to go back to Niger and is working to give her country architectural prominence. Turning difficulties into constraints, her portfolio shows that architectural space has the power to change social dynamics and relationships. Her work, alongside the work of the other 3 architects who will be presented, was published in the March issue of the Architectural Review, which you can, of course, get a copy of. And so without further ado, I will hand over to the shortlist. And so we will start with Simona Della Rocca, who will present her work to you.
Thank you very much, Manon, for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation to this conversation. I'm very happy of being here and with the other colleagues and share our work. I'm trying just to share the presentation. Just a second. Okay. So, So my presentation is about the Fairing School, which is a project we completed last year here in Turin, and it is the result of a competition that was held in 2017 by the 2 private foundations, Fondazione Agnelli and Compagnia di San Paolo here in Turin. And the aim was to transform in an existing building into a new school that could be also be useful for new teaching methods, let's say. So yeah, the aim of this to transform this public building was the main purpose of the competition, but it was also interesting because, as you can see from the image, the existing building was designed in the 60s, and it's a typical reinforced concrete skeleton with masonry facades. And apart from the state of the presentation, which was quite lamentable, we were quite impressed by the way in which this building was conceived, because of this articulation of volumes and the interconnection among spaces, and also this interstitial system of green areas, which was very, very interesting to us. But another point which was very interesting to our eyes is that this typology is very widespread on the national territory, because as many Italian schools was built during the demographical boom after World War II. So the topic of restructuring these structures nowadays is really becoming crucial, at least here in Italy. And what you can usually see in this kind of structure, if you go on the inside, is that corridors are usually inactive spaces that just serve for circulation, while teaching spaces are usually conceived as very enclosed units that were conceived for the typical transmissive teaching activities. So the question was, how can we provide, the question provided by the competition brief was how we can provide new life to the spaces in order to be in line with the demand of our times. So we started, in order to answer this question, we started to see the building from an urban perspective, and it was quite clear that this modernist morphology making the building quite introverted and has a poor relation with the external spaces of the city. So we decided to reverse this condition by moving the main access to the building from a trafficated crossroads to what was the rear of the building, an abandoned parking lot, and make it become a sort of mediation space among the school and the city, so a sort of garden that could also the entrance to other public activities that could be open to the community after school time. And of course, the other intention was to work mainly by addition, by adding new structures that could innovate the envelope of the building. So we interpreted this idea of innovating the envelope of the building, but by providing new spaces, so new educational opportunity. And this is also because at the time in 2017, while we were doing this competition, we did a research on educational models, and we were very interested in trying to find out the relation among architecture and pedagogy. And we were quite impressed by the modern experiments of the open air schools, so especially because of the principles of freedom and relation from interior and outdoor spaces. So the idea of these spaces that could open directly onto the landscape, we thought that those principles were very in line with our times and with the new pedagogical need of the school. So this is why we decided to work by adding those elements that generate a sort of extra general space among the school and the exterior, and also that characterize the new front of the building with this great visual permeability towards the new garden. And so this idea of addition also combined with other elements such as the a work on textures and colors, and also on the frame as a compositional element. They try to establish a sort of dialogue with the existing structures. And of course, the project is characterized by these in-between spaces among inside and outside that could provide those extra space for teaching, also recreational activities. Also, the finishing material of the building is plaster. It's called plaster, processed through the use of different grains. And this was also because we wanted to differentiate the facades in an inexpensive way, because the budget of the intervention was quite strict. But also we wanted to try to maintain a dialogue with the complexity of texture that is typical from the building of that specific period. Then if we go to see the interior spaces, all the internal units were organized according to the existing structures, but then there are some vertical elements that change the perception of these interior spaces and try to provide an interconnected system among the connected spaces and the classrooms. So, for example, if we see the classroom have these elements that these sort of windows that can provide a sort of connection between the corridor and these external spaces, so to be perceived as an interconnected system. Or also, for example, if you see the picture on the right, which is a connective area, there are these elements such as tents that can provide some sort of space that could be used in a different manner according to the time. Or also on picture on the left is the library. The school didn't have a lot of space to host also an auditorium, so we decided to insert it inside the library, so to make these changing activities over time. Another condition that we were interested to explore, another design choice, was to not over-determinate the interior spaces with strong design choices. So we decided that we conceived this interior space as very calm background, then dotted with some colored or active elements, in order also to counterbalance the strong presence of the color shade of the outside. And just a few information. The school was conceived and then also built into a limited period of time. The construction only lasts 1 year. And this is because the municipality didn't want the school to be closed for more than 1 year. And so also not to displace the students in other places. And this, of course, affected the design choices since the beginning. So this is also why we were considering all these dry structures that then will assemble directly into the construction sites. And also another interesting part of the process is that there were a participatory process that was managed by the client, and it was very interesting because it was not only to show, of course, and to present the project, but also to involve teachers and try to explain how this new building could support a different use of the spaces and also support different teaching methods. And I think this is also the reason why the school, when it opened last year, it was September 2019. It started immediately to be used as it was conceived, because both teachers and children were, let's say, prepared to that. And also we were quite happy at the beginning. All of these images, of course, were taken last year in October. When the school was active, and we were quite happy because we have positive feedback both from students and teachers. And also, of course, nowadays the school is responding well because of all of these generous extra spaces that were provided, but there are some limitations, of course, in the use, because cannot be so freely appropriate by students as it was conceived in the project. But I think that this image well summarized the fact that people can really freely appropriate this building, and it is something that really interests. It's an interest we want to explore with our work, to conceive well thought buildings, but they can be that can have a degree of change, that can be freely appropriated and can give some transformation also over time. So yeah, that is something that we would like to explore more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simona. I think we'll go straight to the second presentation by Stefanie, and we'll save the questions and the conversation for the end.
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me as well. And Simona, also fantastic to see that building and hear you talk about it. It's absolutely beautiful. I will be talking mainly about Bethnal Green Mission Church, which completed in September 2018. And it's the largest completed project that our practice, Gatti Ralph Rhodes, which I set up with my colleagues Richard Gatti and Tom Ralph about 7 years ago now. So Bethnal Green Mission Church is a mixed-use building, and it includes a church, worship space, a cafe, a community space, offices, a vicarage, and 14 apartments above that actually fund the scheme. The existing building was a quite poorly constructed 1950s building, although it did have its charms, but it flooded from above, from below on a regular basis. It had multiple seven staircases alone from a sort of higher ground floor. It was entirely inaccessible for anyone with mobility issues, and the church didn't have any funding to complete the sort of substantial repairs required. The church partnered up with a developer so that then the private sale apartments would fund provide the funding for the church and the community facilities development. Right at the beginning of the project, we showed the church, it was our client, jointly with the developer actually, 2 different local examples of how you can do church, and this approach of exploring concepts and listening and researching is very fundamental to the way that we approach projects. So to the left, you can see Christchurch Spitalfields by Hawksmoor, and to the right, you can see the Brick Lane Mosque. That used to be a Huguenot church, and it was in Neuf-Église. And both these churches were built pretty much within a couple of years of each other. And so while Christ Church sits at the end of this avenue and has these grand views, exemplifies the power and sort of separateness of God, the Neuf Églises and Brick Lane Mosque is completely integrated into its sort of streetscape, and you can see the civic nature because it does have those different larger windows, pediment, but it's part of the urban fabric. And actually, you can see it was a mixed-use building as well. It had weavers' lofts, weavers' workshops in the loft. The church was very clear that was the kind of church they wanted. They wanted something that was that felt very much as sort of part of the urban fabric, not a sort of separateness. And that would suit their mission and their understanding of themselves best. So the church itself is located in Bethnal Green, at the heart of the Bethnal Green Conservation Area. It's got a Grade 1 listed church, St John on Bethnal Green by John Soane opposite, so that's the building here in the foreground. And it's got a Grade 2 star listed Museum of Childhood is just opposite on sort of diagonally the other side. So it's quite a complex conservation and planning context. You can see the building just here sort of in the background. And we used that conservation context to inform the facade of this sort of concrete grid and the infill panel. So that's sort of the reference to St John as well. The main church space is defined by these concrete ceiling beams. And as a practice, so in this mixed-use building, there's a sort of change of scale of spaces between the apartments and the community spaces. And as a practice, I think we're interested in using these constraints and actually expressing them and making them beautiful, making them something that defines these spaces. And these deep beams form the transfer structure, and the crossing pattern which becomes this visual theme that you can see again and again in the building. So here this the concrete ceiling, the acoustic baffling in between. And one of the references we had for that was also to relate it to more traditional church spaces. The church itself doesn't have anything that sort of shouts church. There's no big cross, but there is. You've got this reference to traditional vaulted ceilings. You've got, going back, you've also got this sort of the way that the space is lower on the sides, like side aisles and the central nave. The stained glass we developed with an artist, Coralie Bickford-Smith, and again that references this weaving pattern that comes across in the brickwork. So the brick bond takes that up again, and this is the main gate to the church entrance. As a practice, we don't really have a sort of expressed manifesto or a sort of set design philosophy, but we've got certain themes that we're interested in. And I think each of us also has got slightly different view on things and slightly different things that we're interested in. But I think what ties it together is that we're all interested in materials, how you build, and in particular, how you make spaces generous. And that is not, that does not equal size, but how you make them borrow and overlap spaces to make them beautiful and at the same time practical. And the efficiency that creates is also, of course, environmental, but also site, budget, and resources. So you can sort of, just to go back to, so you've got the central space here with the church at the heart of the building, and the community hall that borrows light, that scoops light from the side, as does the cafe on the other side. So here, looking in the other direction, this is the scoop that brings light into the community hall. And I think one thing to note as well is here, these pin boards is something that we're interested in. These pin boards are actually very cheap and easily replaceable, and it's a way of ensuring that the space can be adapted and can change. They're used for exhibitions, for sort of children's drawings, for sort of youth groups, but they take the scuffs very well, and that sort of inevitably happen in a space like this. The apartments above, so that's the second story upwards, were absolutely key to the scheme because they actually provided the funding. So 14 apartments needed to pay for everything else. And we were very keen to sort of exploit these sort of beautiful views over two parts and make light-filled, beautiful living spaces. Inset balconies to the southern facade are in a way loggias, also outdoor rooms, but they also provide the shading for the living spaces in summer. The building itself is has two separate structural systems, and each of them is appropriate for the scale of spaces and does best. It sort of does best what it can do. And so it's a reinforced concrete frame on the basement up to first floor, and then it's cross-laminated timber above for the apartments. And the cross-laminated timber on the residential floors meant that we could use a more efficient foundation system, reduce the foundation requirements, and that with the embodied carbon of the timber actually means that we've greatly reduced the carbon impact of the building. Just to sort of go back to the ground floor plan, this is a listed park at the bottom, Paradise Gardens, that had suffered a lot of antisocial behaviour and problem drinking. We're very keen to improve that. Originally, the building didn't have anything that opens up onto, the sort of windows started on first floor level, and there also was no connection. We're very keen to improve that as part of the works. So the community spaces line this park. We created that new connection, and as you can see, that also allowed the new businesses that have relatively recently established in these railway arches, gave them that connection directly through to the tube station, so a real tangible benefit in exchange for the construction works, I guess. The cafe is located on this corner, and it acts as an entrance point. So it allows the church to stay open by having this informal point of control. And the office is on the first floor. It enabled the church to actually have some commercial funding as well as have offices for charity. So this is actually our office. So I'm sitting in that at the moment. And yeah, we're very lucky to be here. And just to finish off, I think as a practice, we're interested in keeping our work diverse. So we sort of want to work on a number of scales. We've worked on theatre design, on sort of stackable chairs, on smaller scale refurbishments, because that allows us to experiment, that allows us to build a lot, and provides good experience for our staff. We hope to continue doing that alongside the sort of larger scale mixed use and community schemes that we are also working on. So thank you very much. That's me.
Thank you so much, Stefanie. And our third presentation is Francesca.
Thank you, Simona and Stefanie. So, when the Architecture Review invited me to participate to the Moira Gemmill Forum, I felt sincerely touched. And I soon realized the length of time passed by since March. We have been living events that have asked us all to reinvent the gestures and the geographies of our daily, as well as they have offered us the chance to reflect on and rephrase somehow both our practices and teaching activities. We all, I think, experienced that limits, physical limits, challenge our mind to be freer, our soul to be more empathic, and therefore limits bring us closer to simple questions and may open us to possibilities. Homer wrote that memory, mnemosine, is the mother of all muses, because memory is precisely imagination. Imagination has lapses of memory, memory has lapses of imagination. I do believe that this imaginative faculty, hence ability to remember, helps us to overcome frightens and to be open-minded towards the unknown. The value, therefore, of this forum is that of confronting experiences, civic and professional experiences, and making them public in the perspective of learning from each other. So, as my colleagues before, I will now accompany to my interest, and I will share the screen. Cosmos, our sole exhibition at Triennale Milano, stitches in one word, chaos and cosmos, alluding to a paradoxical coexistence of logic and intuition. Each project has its own specificity, but the interest is in the relations among the objects and in their ability to awaken new narratives in visitors through memory and associations. The associations of the mind are unpredictable, yet very precise, and that most of the time stay unspoken, silent. I am interested in searching a cultural continuity among past cultures and the ones to come, a dialogue beyond formal mimes. How? Culture is a slow phenomenon that unravels far beyond the lifetime of a human being, a long process of layering of lives and temporary cultural agreements where we may recognize some permanencies beyond form and language. It begins when I approach a context most of the time as a stranger, and I start a journey literally walking along the landscape, streets and houses, or through the words and images of books, the sounds of songs or unknown languages, the refrains of popular tales and traditions. This time of the traveler collects hints of the culture of a place and traces an open map of relations where many other different information lay in rest. Somehow alike, the pebbles and shells brought to the shore from the sea that appear and disappeared at every new wave. An open-air museum in Libyan desert and a caravansary, a holiday house in Tuscany and the medieval city walls, a library pavilion in China and the tapestry of light and shadow among the bamboos. Are these only hints and guesses? Hased Beguinage is almost a blind brick wall toward the city, where it opens with a rational filigree of windows towards the interior garden. The extension wing of Z33 resonates its character. Every place holds the memory of the glaciers and also holds the memory of the people who inhabited and built them in centuries, layering cultural gestures into an harmonious amalgam. This character that we could name conscience is specific, and it seems to express the primary relations that have survived, that have been invested in new meanings. A brick wall is a brick wall. It sounds like a wall. It is solid, continuous. It took a long time and effort to keep that promise with the help of tradition and a little hazard of invention. 3 years study, 68 brick color tests, 20 mortar tests, 103 brick types, 34,000 bricks, 5mm displacement, 3mm tolerance, 2 men making the bricks, 5 men building the facade. Almost infinite drawings. It is our responsibility to build trust in all actors of a building process in order to overcome the laziness of conventions and make feasible the authenticity of an experience. As for us, delightfully writes in Ars Poetica, Roman knights and plebeians would join in roaring laughing, if the words be discordant to the one who speaks the words. His character maybe. As there is a wide difference if a hot young man or a Roman merchant, a Colchian or an Assyrian speaks. Similarly, spaces need to be consonant, with the narrative. People need to live them. Now we walk around. It is a continuous interplay of proportions, of light and shadow, of interior and exterior, of cities and rooms. We walk around. Once the narrative and the primary spatial relations are clear, the building is already living, and all the immense work that follows is a process of taking care that promises are not compromised. In all these months, and still we are busy developing the prototypes for the Bamboo Library Pavilion in Yangshuo, the normal work. It is a great honor to be here, to be mentioned, and then to be awarded, because Moira Gemmill Award is a recognition of the quality of the work, but primarily it makes visible examples, I speak plural intentionally, of practices. And our shared gift and responsibility is in offering trust in people to be intelligent, to question the rules, to take responsibility for them, to be honest. I do believe that the tools of our profession are competence, empathy, and a sense of responsibility. Then we should act consequently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Thank you to all three of you for very beautiful presentations, very rigorous work, very different too. I remember when we finished with the judges in the session, one of the things that they said about your work, Francesca, was that you occupy the same space as Olgiati or Zumta, but that you go beyond your mentors and that you achieve a level of completeness in an industry that doesn't often allow for it. And considering this forum and this prize is part of the W Awards and is sort of kind of contributing to kind of positive change and more equality in gender, but also beyond in the profession, my first question has to be, who are your mentors? And I think this is a question that I would like all three of you to answer. Who have they been? Who are they today? How much are you learning from, but also going beyond perhaps some of the things that you might have learned or some of the ways that you might have been taught? Perhaps we can start with you, Francesca.
If I may, I feel that a mentor is a person that sees you and is able to offer you the question that makes you able to take in hand your life. It may happen several times in your life and change it. So it gives you a perspective through question that awakens a trust and an ability to be in movement, be alive, and be more yourself. And in that sense, if that may be my interpretation of mentor, I was fortunate to have several mentors that helped me, from my Italian literature teacher in high school to craftsmen met even when I was a teenager, or unknown people I met during a theater performance or dance or just along the street.
Do you find yourself looking do you still need sort of, do you need new mentors or not necessarily? Or do you find do you come across people and practices that you kind of learn from further down the line as you kind of create your own journey?
I believe I learn from all colleagues and from all practices. All the world is teaching a lot when you reveal difference and when you reveal affinity in both cases. And so I need mentors every day of my life. But often I say to my students, if you feel that you find a maître, you should run. I think it is unhealthy for an individual being to lose yourself, like to give in yourself and not have build up or seek and build up a dialogue that makes both parts alive in a way. So I think that we all need each other very deeply and lively. So always. Then to say about the practices, I had a wonderful also teaching from school. I remember like Umberto Tubini, professor, taught me how water is the most scary danger in buildings. Or I remember that when I was in the beginning as an employee by architect Peter Zumthor, there was a wonderful atmosphere that everything was possible. And that is something which is very entrusting.
What about you, Stefanie? Can you tell us a little bit about your mentors?
I think I agree with Francesca that I don't think, at least for me, there isn't a sort of single person or a single figure. And it also depends for which aspect of being an architect and becoming an architect and sort of developing as an architect. I think design-wise, there's a whole host of people that that I'm interested in, that we're interested in as practice. There's the sort of conversations we have as a practice with my colleagues that sort of allow us to that are challenging. And I think that is very useful. And there's been tutors that have been very helpful. I think for me, it was also then the sort of there's mentors in terms of confidence to actually value the work you're doing and the confidence to sort of put that forward. There's been, you know, that includes first year tutor of mine, for example. And then there's also people that I've met and admired in the way that they have the confidence to run a business and set up practice and go ahead with that. Peers that have set up practice around the same time, and that you have conversations with me like, wow, okay, you know, this is doable. This is, you know, this is hard, but it's doable. And these are, you know, these are sort of attitudes that are helpful to get through difficulties, because there always are challenges. So I think that there is that range as well from Ruth, from sort of my first year tutor to these other people. And I think I agree. I wouldn't want to, with Francesca, I wouldn't want to have a single hero, because I don't believe in that sort of hero cult in architecture in the first place. I think it's complete nonsense and actually really detrimental. And I'm not going to have a rant, but yeah. So I think it's really healthy to have this wide range and to continually look at new work and interrogate it and see how that relates to what you're interested in your practice, and learn to be self-critical without putting yourself down. I think is very important as well in that context.
It's okay to have a rant, I think, sometimes. And I think part of this idea of kind of destroying a little bit of the kind of the star architects and the kind of the creation of like our own heroes, I agree, can be detrimental. And I think a lot of the intention with these awards and this program is to kind of show a multiplicity and a diversity of ways to be an architect, and different ways of practicing, and different people, different types of people. So yeah, I'm curious, Simona, to hear from you whether you agree, or I guess
what can I add more? I mean, I agree with what both Francesca and Stefanie mentioned. I think it's hard to say there is one mentor, or to find a specific professional figure or academic figure that could really change your path. I think that our profession is, I mean, we intend our profession as a path which is always in process, and because you build your own references, you build your own culture, you build your own memory, as Francesca was mentioning also in this presentation, that sometimes emerges during your work in an unpredictable manner, as she was saying. I think that it's very important to be in our profession. I mean, as we intend our profession, it's very important to be humble and to be ready to learn from other professionals, ready to learn from other skilled workers. And I think that is the way to approach the profession in an honest manner, let's say, no, without being without predetermining thinking or predetermining conditions, and being open to changes.
One of the things, oh, were you, no, go ahead, Francesca.
I had questions for Simona and Stefanie. You tell me when I can make questions.
Of course you can, yeah. So we have the Q&As open, and we have questions coming, but obviously this is also a conversation between you as well, as you sort of discover and learn more about each other's work. So please ask them a question, Francesca.
I had the questions for Simona, because there was this thorough research on educative examples which were related also to buildings, and then there is also a knowledge of buildings which are kind of forgotten, which are existing but hold a culture and a value. And so I was curious if you thought about proposing a kind of inventarium of these buildings for further development, like how can be invented a better knowledge of the existing and work with that. And the second question, you spoke about how the students were relating to this space after the participative process, and they were occupying the spaces, but I was curious if you got feedback, if teachers and both students discovered a new way of learning, teaching, or something changed. And for Stefanie, the question was this accent on the multiple scales, which very strongly relates to urbanity in a way, in different historical times. And I wished to listen more about your reflections, as very often briefs of assignments by investors, may they be private, public, or a mix of them, rarely propose in the brief a kind of hint of this variety of scales. That is, I think, is very interesting, your side. And also, the second question also relates to the context, but on two sides. One is the relation with almost a memory of urbanity with the plurality of accesses that you have at the ground floor, and the other to the representation of a kind of ornamento. What is the value of that for you? Basta.
I'm conscious of time, but no, I think we have time for everything. Simona, I'd be curious to hear a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So regarding the participatory process and the feedback that we get, well, students got immediately, used to the way the building could be lived, and teachers also, but they started to have some resistance at the moment. I mean, it took a while. It took like a month or two before they really started to enjoy, let's say, the freedom of, you know, moving freely and using different spaces where to go to make classes and so on. Of course, today it changes a little bit because, I mean, the school was conceived in order to have thematic classes. So the students really were supposed to move around all the school, like from different floors and different areas. And because that was part of the pedagogical input that was given to us from the beginning, in order to really not stay closed in a space for the whole day, but really appreciate all different spatial experiences that a building can give. Today, of course, it's not really used like that, but of course, they are still using these external spaces that are provided to, you know, extend their practical teaching experience during the day. And I think that was quite important also to look for the relation from the architecture and the pedagogical issue, because that specific typology, I think that it's very important to study in a deep way, in a deep manner, the way the building could be used, and to really discuss with the users, because otherwise it could have become, you know, just a just a new intervention without really being, without really responding to the needs of the users of the schools. And also, we are very interested in this topic of trying to understand how to reuse existing, to reuse and to readapt this existing scholar building. And we also try to continue this research. For example, this summer we teach at the University of Venice, and we made a workshop regarding this topic of the repurposing of building in order to blur their physical boundary. And we started to make a more a sort of, we call it an alternative lexicon of learning spaces. So trying to understand how you can deal with existing building and make a sort of a glossary, let's say. And yeah, it's something we are trying to do in our you know, extra time apart from the work. So yeah, it's something that it's interesting.
Stefanie, are you happy to answer Francesca's questions? And then there'll be a few more questions I will add.
Absolutely. The sort of question of scale is interesting for us in the way that we work on different projects, so that we try to work on projects of really any scale, because there's interesting things happen when you move from scale to scale, when you focus in, when you layer depth to a building. And I think that's something that we then try to also translate into our buildings, that they have this this sort of depth, this sort of you focus in, and there's things that read back again, that jump from scale to scale, which I think is what you might refer to as a sort of urbanity, or that's at least what we hope it is, the sort of urban nature. That's how we read it. I think there's also, to sort of the second part, this investment and money question, and it's just at least in our practice, or in my practice, or in what I've experienced also working for other practices in London, it's absolutely key to getting anything built. It's like either it stacks up or it doesn't, and you have to. That's why the sort of profession of architecture, there's so much negotiation, there's so much understanding of how the economy, how sort of economic pressures and the sort of aspirations, and the understanding of how short-term value relates to long-term value. These sort of negotiations are absolutely key, and I think as architect, it's very easy to step back and sort of say, oh, that's not my patch. But I think that's really problematic, because that's where we can come up with solutions and can sort of put things forward, sort of add another perspective, which again has something to do with scale. So I think that's been absolutely key to getting anywhere to some extent. And then there was a question about access, about this the ground floor plan of Bethnal Green Mission Church does have a lot of this openness towards different directions, different uses, and I do think again that's sort of our understanding of layering of uses and the sort of complexity of enabling different things to happen at different times of the day and allowing the sort of longer term flexibility of being able to close parts of the building, provide security for the residential entrance, or the bike storage, but at the same time enlivening and projecting a sort of civic nature. So I think this sort of being perforated and flowing outwards is really was important for this building, and we weren't able to necessarily do it by building in a way that, for example, Simona's building, really there's a sort of very beautiful gradation of inside and outside and separation and veiling, like in the actual these sort of larger sort of balconies or whatever you want to call them that have been attached to the school, as well as internally. So we try to do that in Bethnal Green Mission Church through the uses and through the way that the openings work and that the structure of the building or the sort of plan of the building works. And the last, the sort of value of ornament. I mean, that's one of the things that we've probably got the sort of most discussions in our office on, because we've got different views on that. But for me personally, it is very much part of that of creating a building that that isn't flat, that becomes a background building to a city while retaining a depth that you move close to and there's more stories to discover and away again, but without it becoming this, the sort of the awful word, the landmark building, the sort of fancy, the bright pop that becomes boring. They're usually quite flat as well, those buildings. I'm not as clear what I mean with flat, but I think there's sort of a value in using ornament in a way that allows a building again to be read on different scales. And I think there needs to be a reason and a rationale within that ornament, at least for me or for us. But at the same time, it can be very beautiful.
Sorry, I was going to say it's interesting that with very different programs and very different cities that you've worked in, whether it's Turin, East London, Hasselt, and obviously designing a school, a kind of church with housing, with a cafe, or a kind of gallery extension, none of your buildings immediately scream, this is what I am. Like you said, Stefanie, obviously, like, we're not putting a cross here and it doesn't shout church in any way, but I think it's actually true of all three buildings. And I wonder if it's actually related to what we're speaking about, which is this idea of being an inclusive kind of public building, of kind of welcoming other types of people in, and having this kind of gradation of spaces, of opening up the ground floor of the school to people from like the wider neighborhood, and of having spaces that are much more subtle in a way. And one of the questions that someone is asking is, they're first saying that all three of you have worked on very beautiful public facing projects, and asking what the challenges and also the rewarding moments are of designing for the public. And I wonder, Simona, if you can tell us a little bit more about that question of inclusivity, of kind of how do you bring different types of people and people who weren't even originally part of your brief, weren't the kind of obvious users of the school, into your building?
Yes. Well, at the moment, of course, the school is no longer open to the neighborhood because of the current condition. But that was really appreciated also by the school, by the teachers, and so on. At the beginning, they were quite jealous of their new spaces. Once it was finished, they really didn't want to share it completely. But then, I mean, it was very interesting, this confrontation, because everybody understood the value of, you know, bringing this new community area inside this neighborhood, which is also characterized by a strong commercial area. So it doesn't also already cultural activities. So that is why it was really important. And I think that it was very, to answer your question, so rewarding to see really how I mean, designing for the public, I think it's interesting because you can really somehow change the quality of the daily life of the people that are living in these buildings. So you really see that the spaces you were conceived are really making somehow a difference. In this case, particularly, the school is located in a peripheral area of the city, so also the users are not, I mean, not everybody has the same opportunity at home. Okay, so that is what it was very important to provide quality, to give quality to these spaces. So I think that was very, yeah, it was very, we were very happy when we saw that all students were really appreciating all the school's opportunities.
I'd like to, I'm very conscious of time and we're already over time, but I'm just going to steal a few more minutes. I think that's okay. Otherwise I will hear that it's not. I would like, part of the same question was to ask you, which actually I find quite interesting, about the qualities of the best public building. So I would like to continue and to pick up on what Simona has been saying, to ask Francesca that question, just a few thoughts on the qualities of the best public buildings, but also a question that is more specific to you. Someone would like to ask you, Francesca, whether the exposure to traditional methods of craft over the years has informed your architectural practice. I believe it has, and so if so, they ask which aspects of this has been applied to the Z33 House for Contemporary Art in Hasselt.
I think that through history of architecture, there are wondrous examples of public buildings and their features that they represent. They celebrate, there is a festivity of a temporary cultural agreement in which a community invests. And they've been changing, they even contradict each other, and sometimes they have assonance among each other. But there is this representation which doesn't necessarily need to be louder, which I think is something important. And the other as well, I think, is to dispose a plurality, a kind of open map of plurality, which can be formed in very different ways. So now it may sound vague, but I have some precise examples and would take longer. So it's like stitched in this way. And for this relates also to the other question. I am Italian, but it means that I've been growing in a country that has so much layered history because it's been conquered so much during centuries that it has a built body where so many different cultures have amalgamed. And in that sense, there is a kind of resistance in this amalgam, not exactly in a fixed figure or architectural jewel, but it is melanged. So technically, it's not Z33 project is not influenced by Italian plaster, to be straight. But I believe that part of my interest in history is coming from having grown up all time with this very present history, so kind of tolerance towards human life. And yes. Then I think that everywhere we are always belonging to one's own culture, and at the same time also always strangers. So it is really that OSA 33 has a lot of hustle. So I'm a technician.
That feeds in nicely, this idea of being an artist or being an architect or being, how does each of you sort of relate to kind of the job and the role of the architect? Someone is asking if you consider yourself more as an artist or more an architectural designer. Stefanie, what would you say?
I would consider myself an architect.
I think it was funny they said architectural designer or artist, not the architect wasn't on the card.
I think architecture is a lot about it's a lot about negotiation and finding compromises that turn out to actually be better than the original positions. And I think there's so many different things that run into that. There is a different practice in that, and for me, yes, there is the sort of an enjoyment of making, of looking at developing different ideas and options and looking at what what is more beautiful. But there's also an enjoyment in having a discussion on site and actually figuring out that actually we can make this work, and those pipes just need to run slightly differently, and if they connect like that, and we've got this amazing, there's this product from this company that's equally that's actually equally enjoyable. And I think all of these things are run together to create a building as a whole. So I wouldn't want to, I sort of want to sit on the fence on that one.
Simona, are you comfortable with the sort of the title and the image, I guess, and the perception that even non-architects might have of the architect and defining yourself as an architect?
I think I would define myself more architect, not an artist, even though there's always a mediation, let's say, among the conceptual part and the technical part. But I mean, I think that our profession is a technical profession, but then we have the cultural background that makes us understand the artistic or more complex value of society. So that is maybe why sometimes you get confused. But I'm not really comfortable with the artistic definition.
Maybe on this, it's also sweet to recall Vitruvio, the first book, where he says, like, the architect, he needs to know about land measurements and about mathematics, but also he needs to be have knowledge of literature and of music and of philosophy. And of course, we are limited human beings, so not ever possibly we can have all that knowledge. But maybe it's saying we have to listen.
I love the idea that we are ending conversation about the Moira Gemmill Prize as part of the W Awards with Vitruvius in 2020. I think this is a very apt ending point. I'm conscious we're over time, so thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the three of you, Francesca, Stefanie, Simona. I hope we get to meet again somewhere in the real world, whether in London, in Torino, in Genoa. And I just, thank you very, very much for your beautiful presentations and for opening up to all of us.
Thank you very much.
Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, but it's also to Architecture Review and the Moira Gemmill Award that gave us the chance to reflect and learn. So thank you too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Until next time.
Great to finally meet everyone.
Stay safe. Look after yourselves.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.